Hi, I'm Fred Bassett, and I'm going to talk to you today about hummingbirds in the southeastern United States. The way I'm going to do the program today is the first half of the program. I'm going to talk about our wonderful ruby-throated hummingbirds that we have here in the summertime. And then I'm going to transition over to what a lot of people don't know is we have hummingbirds here in the wintertime. And we'll go through those species and talk about them. And very quickly at the end, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it's like if a hummingbird bander comes to your house to band. I'm a Master Hummingbird Bander. I've been banding for over 25 years, and I've banded over 35,000 hummingbirds in 1,300 locations from Miami, Florida to Haines, Alaska. So I've got a little bit of experience with hummingbirds. The logo you see on my shoulder here is my nonprofit organization, Hummingbird Research. And my website is hummingbirdresearch.net, and everything that I'm going to say of any importance in this program is in that website. And I recommend that you go back and take a look at it sometime to learn more about what we're talking about here. Now, when you start talking about hummingbirds, the first question people ask is, how do I attract them to my yard? The best thing you can have is a hummingbird garden, like the one shown here, and a hummingbird feeder. It's amazing how many people now garden for hummingbirds. And anything you do for hummingbirds, you're also doing for all other kind of birds and butterflies and that sort of thing. If you go to my website, and under Attracting Hummingbirds, there's a section on plants for hummingbirds. You can get vines, bushes, trees, everything you need to know about that. The other thing you need is a feeder, and even if you don't have a garden, you need a hummingbird feeder. Then the question becomes, what kind of feeder should you get? What I recommend is go to a store or any kind of commercial hummingbird feeder. What I don't recommend are what I call arts and crafts feeders. They're often quite prettier, but they have some problems with them. One, they tend to drip, and they will all the water will run out and mess up your deck or porch, or they'll get a vapor lock and nothing will come out of them. None of them have insect guards, and they get problems with ants and insects, so I don't recommend those kind of feeders. But just go to a store, buy any kind of commercial feeder. This is a tube type feeder that's very often used. This is a saucer feeder, but any of these work just fine. Now I'm going to show you one other kind of feeder that I recommend for people in the wintertime. And this is a much smaller feeder that only takes a tablespoon of sugar and 4 tablespoons of water to fill it. And it works very well in the wintertime. But these can be hard to find. You normally have to order them, and when you try to find one, you can't ask for a hummingbird feeder. You have to ask for a small hummingbird feeder. And they're quite inexpensive. You can usually get 3 or 4 of them for $10, $15, and they work very well for winter hummingbirds. Now, when you buy your feeder, is probably going to come with a package of hummingbird food. What you need to do is walk over to the nearest trash can and drop that in there, because it's no more than sugar with red food coloring in it. Hummingbirds do not need red food coloring. It does nothing whatsoever to attract hummingbirds. I want to recommend that you make your own hummingbird food, and it's very easy to do. Use regular old table sugar. Mix it 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. I always tell people, if you can't remember it, look at your hand. A thumb of sugar, 4 fingers of water. So that's all you need. And here's some news for you. You don't have to boil the water. I do recommend hot water out of the tap, hot enough to dissolve the sugar. But boiling doesn't do any good whatsoever. If you like to boil water, just go right ahead. It doesn't hurt anything, but it's not necessary. Now, never use anything except regular table sugar. In our world today, people want natural. They think it's healthier. But what they sell for natural sugar here is normally regular old table sugar. They pour molasses in it to make it turn brown, charge you more for it. If you do get real raw sugar or something like that, anything that's brown has a high iron content in it, which is really bad for hummingbirds. So please don't use it. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Just use regular old table sugar. Never use honey. Honey gets a bacteria on hummingbird tongues and will kill them. All right. Now, with your feeder, When you start feeding hummingbirds, you need to change your sugar water. In the hot summertime, every 2 to 3 days, you need to pour out what's left in your feeder, refill it, and put it back out. If you leave a feeder up in the wintertime, about every week or 10 days is fine for doing that. Don't fill your feeder full when you start feeding your hummingbirds. Just put as much in as you think they're going to drink in that amount of time, so you don't wind up pouring out large amounts of it. As you get more hummingbirds, they'll tell you when you need to start putting more in the feeder. So change your feeder regularly. Also, you need to clean your feeder. In the hot summertime, I recommend at least once a week you bring all your feeders in at night after the hummers have gone to roost, run hot water in the sink, put just a little bit of chlorine bleach in there, disassemble your feeders, let them soak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and it'll get rid of all that black mold. You don't have to scrub them. It'll clean them up really well. Then just rinse them out, put sugar water back in them, and put them back out. The hummingbirds will appreciate you doing that, and they'll be a lot healthier for you doing it. In the wintertime, you only need to do that about once a month or so. So it's very, very easy doing that. Okay, now you've gone all that effort to get a hummingbird feeder. You're going to make sugar water. You're going to change it. You're going to keep your feeder clean. What are you going to expect to get? Let me introduce you to the meanest creature on the face of the earth, if you've not met a adult male ruby-throated hummingbird before. Now let's talk about what he looks like. The most obvious thing about him is this red throat or a gorget. It has a white ring around his breast here, kind of a dingy gray breast, and all black tail feathers. You'll notice this hummingbird is wearing a band. This was the old guy. He was 8 years old the last time I caught him in Lakeland, Florida, and he's the record for the age for a male ruby-throated hummingbird. Now let's talk a little bit more about the gorget in hummingbirds. Here's the hummingbird just looking straight at you, and you can see the red in its gorget. Now this same hummingbird's just going to turn his head just a little bit. Now that gorget is black. What's the deal with that? Well, the color in the gorget of hummingbird doesn't come from pigment, so it's not always red. Rather, it comes from iridescence. So unless the bird is in the sunshine and basically pointed at you, you're not going to see red. Late in the summer, I get people that report black hummingbirds to me with a white ring around their neck. And a lot of them don't want to believe it when I tell them it's an adult male ruby-throated hummingbird that you're seeing in the shade. But don't look for that red all the time. But if you get one in hand, like this one that I had here, it's unbelievably red. It's like it's lit up from the inside. It's a beautiful, beautiful red color. And they can even flash that at you in the air. You'll see them as they're flying around. Now, I get people that tell me they have two kind of hummingbirds in the summertime. They have those ruby throats, or ruby red throats as they're normally called, but they have another kind of hummingbird, and this is the other kind of hummingbird they have. This is a female ruby-throated hummingbird that looks a lot different than the male, enough that some people think it's another species. Now, the most obvious thing is they don't have the red throat or gorget, and they're also larger than the males. They're a quarter to a third larger, so you'll see a real size difference when they come to the feeder. Their bills are longer, their wings are longer, and rather than all black tail feathers, they have white on the tips of their tail feathers. So in the summertime, in the southeast, if you see a hummingbird at your feeder that has white all the way underneath like that, trust me, that's going to be a female ruby-throated hummingbird. She's also wearing a band, and she was also 8 years old the last time I caught her at a home in Tallahassee, Florida. Now, late in the summer, I get people that contact me and tell me that they only have female ruby-throated hummingbirds at their house. Well, the reason for that is they don't understand that that is a male ruby-throated hummingbird. The reason that you can tell it's a young ruby-throated hummingbird from the summer are the lines of green dots called stippling in its throat. Female ruby-throated hummingbirds don't get that. So if you see that, looks like a 5 o'clock shadow, that's going to be a young male. As the summer goes along, they start to get individual gorget feathers, and they can appear in any part of their throat. Sometimes as much as half of it will be filled in. By the time migration is over, in October, they will go into the tropics for the winter. They will do a complete molt or change of feathers, and they're going to be adults when they come back the next spring. Now let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of ruby-throated hummingbirds. They winter from about central Mexico down through Central America down to northern Panama. In February, they start putting on weight and moving north into Mexico. And you can look at your calendar, and just about the 1st of March, the first adult male ruby-throated hummingbirds are going to launch off at night anywhere along here, and they're going to fly 18 hours nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico. And some people want to say that they all come up through Texas or through Mexico into Texas. A few do, but within 3 days from Brownsville, Texas to Cedar Key, Florida, hummingbirds show up. So they don't come to Texas, then Louisiana, then Mississippi, then Alabama, then Georgia. A good proportion of them come directly across. And being humans, we kind of come up with ways we think they should, and you would think they might jump from here across to Cuba and come up through Florida, but they don't. I band down in Florida a lot, and there's never a significant migration down through Florida. Now, for about the first 2 weeks in March, it's all adult males. Starting about the 15th of March, females start coming ashore, and they move north about 10 to 15 miles a day, and you can actually find some websites where you can track the northward movement of the ruby-throated hummingbirds in the spring. The ones early in the spring don't stick around very long. You may only see if you feed her once or twice. They're in a hurry going back to where they were originally hatched. Some of them you can see go all the way up into Canada. They're going to go back to where they were originally hatched. The males get there first, and they start defending an area against any other male ruby-throated hummingbirds. The females come along behind them, and when they get there, as they're gathering nesting material and feeding, when they go into an area that's protected by an adult male, he's got something on his mind: mating. So if you've ever been lucky enough to be out anywhere and seen a hummingbird doing a great big U in the sky going zoom, zoom, that's a male ruby-throated hummingbird doing a mating demonstration. And what you normally don't see is sitting in a bush at the bottom of that's a female, and she's watching him. And she's grading him for how he's doing. And if he's not up to standard, she'll just move on and keep going. If she stays there, he will come down right in front of her where she's sitting and do what's called a shuttle maneuver and go back and forth very, very quickly and very loud, going bzz, 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 like that. If she stays there for that and is amenable, then they mate. And I hate to tell you ladies this, but that's the end of the male participation in this. And I'm going to cover all this in detail here later. By herself, she's going to finish building the nest, lay 2 eggs, incubate them, feed the young until they come out of the nest. Everybody wants to see a hummingbird nest. The female normally builds her nest in trees, not in bushes, between about 15 and 40 feet high, on a small limb about the size of your little finger, and quite often underneath some leaves to provide some protection against rain and sunshine. She makes the nest out of soft plant material like cattail fluff and thistledown, and a large proportion of spider webs. Spider webs are flexible, they're strong, and so the nest can expand, and we'll show you that as we go through here. After she completes the nest, then she puts pieces of moss or lichen off the same tree around it for camouflage, which makes it very difficult to see. And you can see how small the nest is. A quarter will fit over the top of it very easily. So if you look up in a tree, you just see a knot. So especially ruby-throated hummingbird nests are very, very difficult to find. Everybody wants to see a nest. So here's one in an oak tree. Here's one in a pine tree. And here's a special one that a lady found in a chestnut tree at her home in Tallahassee, Florida a few years ago. Her bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and she looked out and saw this bird nesting there. And it successfully fledged 2 out of there, and it came back the next year and rehabbed that nest and used it again. What I'm trying to tell you here is if you are lucky enough to find a hummingbird nest, if you can possibly resist it, leave it alone, because there's a chance that she will come back years and years and reuse that same nest. So you may get to see hummingbirds for several years. I know specifically of one ruby-throated hummingbird that used a nest up near Goodwater, Alabama for 6 years. So try not to disturb that nest. My current favorite nest is this one that was in Opelika, Alabama, actually out over a pool. And you can see that she's very happy sitting on that nest there, and a classic ruby-throated hummingbird nest. Now, she's going to lay 2 eggs. The eggs are about the size of a Tic Tac, which are very, very small in the bird kingdom, but for the ratio of the size of the female to the egg, is the largest in the bird kingdom. Matter of fact, she can't lay 2 eggs at once. It's going to take about 3 days before she can lay the second egg. Here's a nest with 2 new eggs in it. She's going to incubate these eggs for about 14 to 17 days. You'll see this nest is just big enough for the eggs and for her to sit in. You can see her breast fits right there, just big enough for what she needs there. Now, when the young birds hatch, they're kind of ugly little birds, but all birds are ugly. They get beautiful very, very quickly. Now, here they are at about 5 and 8 days old. Here's at about 8 and 11 days old. And one of the things that you might be interested here, see all these white things here? Those are pins. Bird feathers can't grow in as feathers. They can't break through the skin and grow that. So they come in, look like the world's smallest little soda straws, that they come all the way out like that, and then the pins disintegrate like dandruff, and you have feathers there. So this bird's getting its new feathers there. You can see here, young in the nest is expanding out around them. They tend to stay down in the nest like this. And if you're really lucky enough to find a nest like that, if you go up and blow on it or hum, 2 bills will come up to be fed by mom. They stay in the nest for about 18 to 21 days in the southeast before they fledge out. This is a couple that we happened to find just on the day that they fledged out. And the important thing about this is that when they fledge out, they're full size. They're as big as their parent. So you can't tell at your feeder if you have a adult bird or an immature bird. Also, they get bigger than the nest, so they wind up standing on top of the nest or sometimes shinnying up a limb one way or the other. The only thing that's not complete when they fledge out is their bills are not full length, but within a week their bills are full length, and then you can't tell them at all. But you can quite often tell by behavior if you have an immature bird at your feeder. If a bird comes up and pecks on the side of the feeder or sits on the top of the feeder just trying to figure out what's going on, that's an immature bird. And the adults don't give them any slack. It's figured out pretty quickly or die. Now, once they fledge out of the nest, they will follow their mom around for about a week to 10 days while she is feeding or building her second nest to be fed. After that amount of time, she does not recognize them anymore, and they're on their own. Now, how many times they nest depends on where they are. Up in Canada, season's only long enough for them to nest once. In the central U.S., quite often they'll band twice. And here in the southeast, they will quite often nest as many as 3 times in the summertime. So they're busy the whole time. When they finish nesting, everything turns around and the birds start south in fall migration. I tell people down in the southeast, because it's an easy date, remember the 4th of July. If you don't have a feeder up, you need to put one up then. Or if you have one feeder up, you need to get others ready, because migration starts about the 1st of July, builds through August. The height of the migration is in September. And then about the 10th of October, it's like they hit a light switch and the hummingbirds are gone. Now, people tend to think that they have the same hummingbirds all during fall migration, but that's not the way it works. There's actually an ocean of hummingbirds continually moving through, and most of those birds are only staying in your yard for a day or two. What you see at the end in October, when all the birds are gone, that's just the last birds leaving. Okay, now you're all experts in ruby-throated hummingbirds except for one thing. When I first started banding years ago, these ladies would tell me, son, you don't understand. This is not a hummingbird. This is a fairy / spirit / angel, that sort of thing. And I kind of dealt with that for a good while, and I'm about halfway there now. And the reason for that is because we interact with hummingbirds. Now, you may feed other kind of birds in your yard, but they don't know who's feeding them. They don't know any. They just know that food appears and they eat it. Hummingbirds know exactly what's going on. They know who fills their feeders. If your feeder goes dry, they know. They come over to the window and tell you in no uncertain term, get out here and refill my feeder. Quite often they're as curious about us as we are about them. I have hummingbirds come up quite regularly and check me out. I always say they've never seen anything that ugly, that sort of thing. And I have ladies tell me that it almost hit me right in the face. And they're doing that on purpose. They're trying to intimidate you. They'll spread out their wings and their tail, and if you run, they will chase you. And they think it's great fun. But they're just interacting with us, and that's what makes them such fascinating creatures. This is at one of our banding stations. One of our banders was drinking sweet tea out of that big cup here. This female ruby-throated hummingbird lights on it, sits there for a second, and then she's going to get her share. So no other bird's going to come right up in front of you like that and feed like that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see them do that. Now, there are more myths and outright lies about hummingbirds than just about anything else I know. One of the things that you get from people is they see something that's 2.5 inches long and weighs what a paperclip weighs, and they can't wrap their mind around the fact this bird's going to go a couple of thousand miles on its own power. And so I get these stories about, I've always heard that they migrate on the backs of geese. Trust me, they don't. Hummingbirds are perfectly capable of going anywhere under their own power. They don't need any help from anybody. And they all migrate individually. There's no such thing as a flock of hummingbirds. You may see a lot of them in a feeder, but they're not together. Each one is by itself doing that. Now, with that bill, some people think that's like a needle at the end of their bill. And I get people that are amazed that I'll stick my hand in a trap and take them out. But that bill is actually very fragile and it breaks very easily. So they're not going to stick you like that. Now, their bill's open like all other birds. That's the way they eat insects, which provide all the proteins and vitamins and minerals they need. But they quite often have problems with their bills or even broken bills. And I get calls from people that want me to take their bird that has a broken bill. And I'm sorry, if a bird has a broken bill, nature's going to take care of the problem. There's nothing that we can do about it. The other thing about that bill is some people think it's the soda straw, and that birds drink like drinking through a straw, but that's not the way they drink at all. Their tongue is as long again as their bill, goes way out, and the end of it is forked and slightly feathered. It goes in and out about 15 to 20 times a second, and it's more like a cat lapping milk, the way they drink. And they can take in an amazing amount of food like that, but it's through lapping, not sucking like that. Now, everybody that's fed hummingbirds for a while has been told by what I call a self-appointed expert that if you don't take your feeder down by a certain date, the hummingbirds will stay and they will die from the cold, and it'll be your fault. When people tell me that, I always ask them if they rip up all the flowers in their yard that day. Of course they don't. And our ruby-throated hummingbirds are gone here in October when it's not cold. Them leaving has nothing to do with the cold. It has to do with when they're through nesting, it's time for them to go back to the tropics. So don't worry about that. The other thing we found over the years is that hummingbirds are much more cold hardy than we used to think. 30 years ago, the conventional wisdom was if it got to freezing, hummingbirds died. Well, that's not true at all now. What we found now is that no matter how cold it gets, if hummingbirds have access to a liquid feeder, they're perfectly fine. I've banded hummingbirds in 15-degree weather, and they're just fine. Now, here in the southeast, you normally don't have to worry about your feeder freezing, because if you make sugar water, like I told you, with a ratio of 1 to 4, it won't start to freeze until about 27 degrees, and it won't freeze solid till about 22 degrees. So there are very few days that we get to that. If you do get into freezing weather here, I recommend that you have 2 feeders And if you see your feeder freezing, just switch it out with the other feeder once in a while, and they'll take care of your problems. Now, some of these birds now winter further and further north. I had one lady in Cordova, Alaska that had 2 hummingbirds that spent the winter with her. But if you're that far north, then you have to heat your feeder. If you go on YouTube and look up heating a hummingbird feeder, there are all kinds of ways that you can do that to take care of that.